He laughed while tearing her award on TV. The Muslim girl's next move silenced the studio. We have a dream of reaching 1,000 subscribers by the end of this month. Leave your like, subscribe to the channel, and become part of our dream too. The studio lights looked softer from backstage, like distant stars behind a thin curtain of haze. From where she stood, Layla Rahman could see only fragments of the TV set, a glowing desk, a row of cameras, silhouettes of people in headphones moving like shadows. Her name pulsed on a monitor in bold letters, Layla Rahman, Youngest Science Prodigy Award winner. She stared at it for a moment, feeling the words sink into her chest like a stone dropped into deep water. This was supposed to be the biggest day of her life, the night she stepped onto a national stage, not as a stereotype, not as a headline, but as herself. 17 years old, Muslim, hijab wrapped neatly in her favorite shade of deep green, and the creator of a low-cost water filtration system that had already changed lives in her neighborhood. Her fingers brushed over the edges of the glass award in her hands, tracing the engraved letters. She'd worked so hard for this, late nights, early mornings, endless experiments, and tonight, she was meant to be celebrated. Her mother stood beside her, hands clasped tight, eyes shining with pride and nerves. "You look beautiful," Ummi whispered, adjusting a small fold of Layla's hijab near her cheek. "And strong." Layla smiled, but her chest felt tight. "What if I mess up?" she asked under her breath. "What if I forget my words?" Her mother shook her head. "You don't need perfect words. You just need your truth." She pressed a gentle kiss to Layla's forehead. "Allah gave you this gift of knowledge. You're just sharing it." The producers buzzed around them, checking microphones, adjusting lighting angles, speaking in rushed, clipped sentences that made Layla feel like she was standing in the center of a storm. Somewhere beyond the curtain, the audience murmured, the sound rising and falling like an ocean waiting to swallow her whole. She clutched the award a little tighter, grounding herself in its weight. On the main stage, the host's voice boomed through the speakers, Marco Steele, the country's most famous late-night presenter. Layla had seen him 100 times on TV, laughing, teasing, cutting guests off with punchlines that made the audience roar. He was charming, people said. Sharp. Fearless. But Layla also remembered the clips that had circulated online, jokes about people who looked like her, comments that brushed too close to the edge of prejudice dressed as humor. He'd once imitated a woman in a hijab on air, tilting his head and asking, "Can you really hear me through that thing?" The audience had laughed. Layla hadn't. Now his voice echoed through the studio walls, hyping tonight's guests, warming the crowd. And later, he announced, "We'll meet the young genius making headlines, our own science girl from Queens." The audience applauded. The label stung. Science girl. Not Layla. Not Muslim. Not the daughter of immigrants who'd sacrificed everything. Just science girl. A stagehand tapped her shoulder. "You're up in 30 seconds, he said, not unkindly but with the detached efficiency of someone who'd done this 1,000 times. Layla's heart lurched. 30 seconds until millions of eyes watched her every expression, every word. She took one last breath, hearing her father's voice in her memory, "When they point cameras at you, Habibti, don't shrink. Let them see you as you are." She straightened her back, rolled her shoulders, and lifted her chin. The curtain shifted. A flood of light spilled in, blinding for a second. As the stagehand guided her forward, the audience came into view, rows and rows of faces, some curious, some bored, some already lifting phones to record. At the center of it all stood Marco Steele, grinning widely, holding out a hand that didn't quite reach her. "Ladies and gentlemen," he boomed, "the brilliant girl making us all feel stupid, Layla Rahman." The crowd cheered. For a heartbeat, pride flickered in her chest. She didn't know yet that before this night was over, that same crowd would gasp in stunned silence, because of what he would do, and what she would do next. Layla stepped into the brightness, blinking as the applause softened into polite curiosity. The studio felt colder than she expected, almost clinical despite its vibrant colors. Marco Steele motioned her toward the guest chair with a flourish exaggerated enough to draw a chuckle from the audience. She sat carefully, her award resting on her lap like a fragile piece of her identity she wasn't ready to let anyone else touch. Marco leaned forward, elbows on his desk, giving her a grin that felt too wide, too rehearsed. "So," he began, "you're the big genius everyone's talking about." His tone was friendly on the surface, but something underneath felt off, as if he were greeting a magician's rabbit rather than a young scientist. Layla smiled politely. "I'm just passionate about solving problems in my community," she said gracefully. The crowd murmured approvingly. She felt a spark of confidence, small but growing. Marco's grin tightened. Right, he said, waving a hand dismissively. "But tell me, do you ever feel out of place? I mean, a 17-year-old girl, wearing, well, all that," he gestured vaguely at her hijab, "and winning big science awards? That's unusual, isn't it?" A ripple went through the audience. Not laughter. Not applause. Just discomfort. Layla's face warmed, but she kept her expression calm. "My hijab is part of who I am," she said, voice steady. "It doesn't limit my intelligence or my ability to contribute." A few people clapped softly. Marco raised his eyebrows as if amused. "Touchy," he chuckled. "Relax. It's a compliment. You're breaking stereotypes." He leaned back dramatically. "I mean, look at you. Hijab and test tubes, who knew?" The laughter this time was louder. Layla's grip tightened on the award. Still, she held her composure. She had practiced for this, for dismissive comments, for jokes meant to belittle, for the quiet expectation that she should feel grateful just to be on the stage. "I don't break stereotypes," she replied gently. "People break their own assumptions." The room reacted, surprised murmurs, a few whistles. Even the camera operator looked up. Marco's smile faltered. Just slightly. He shifted in his seat, tapping his pen against the desk in a rhythm too quick to be casual. "Well," he said, laughing again, "speaking of breaking things," he reached for the award on her lap before she realized what he was doing. His hand closed around it. She froze. "Let's see what this brilliance of yours looks like up close." The audience chuckled uncertainly. Layla's pulse quickened. "Please, be careful with it." But Marco Steele was not careful. He lifted the award, held it up to the lights, and made an exaggerated face. "This thing," he scoffed. "Looks like a cereal box prize." A few people gasped, others laughed out of reflex. Before anyone could process what was happening, Marco gripped the award with both hands, and with a dramatic, mocking flourish, snapped the delicate top portion clean off. The sound echoed through the studio like a gunshot. The audience fell silent. Utterly, completely silent. Marco burst out laughing, holding the broken pieces in the air like some twisted trophy. "Oops," he choked out between laughter. "Guess it wasn't built so well after all." Layla stared at the shattered symbol of her work, her dream, her identity, and something inside her cracked too. But beneath that crack, something else began to burn. For a moment, Layla could not hear anything, not Marco's forced laughter, not the uneasy murmurs drifting through the studio, not even her own breathing. It was as if the world had paused just long enough for humiliation to pierce her chest like a blade. She stared at the broken award lying on the desk, its fractured edges glinting under the harsh stage lights. A piece of it had landed by her feet, spinning until it stilled. That award had taken months to earn, late nights of calculations, prototypes that failed, ones that burned, ones that leaked. It had been the first time a major institution recognized not just her intelligence, but her dedication to helping families who could not afford clean water. And now, in front of millions watching from home, Marco Steele had reduced it to a prop for a cheap joke. Her throat tightened, but she did not cry. The studio was breathless, waiting to see whether she would crumble. Marco seemed pleased with the spectacle. He wiped imaginary tears of laughter from his eyes, still holding one of the shattered pieces like a comedian clutching a punchline. "Oh, don't look so shocked," he said, shrugging. "It's just an object. You can get another one." His words floated across the stage like poison. Some audience members shifted uncomfortably. A couple of them whispered to each other, clearly wondering if he had finally gone too far. But Marco, emboldened by years of unchallenged arrogance, leaned closer to her with a smirk. "Come on," he pressed. "You're the genius, right? Just build a new one." The laughter that followed was thin, forced, like people were laughing because they were afraid not to. Layla felt something inside her harden, a quiet, powerful clarity. She realized then that silence was no longer an option. Her mother was still backstage, hands over her mouth, eyes shimmering with horror. She had always taught Layla patience, kindness, composure, but also dignity. "Your voice is part of your faith," she'd once said. "Use it wisely, and use it boldly when necessary." Layla stepped forward slowly, her heart hammering like a drum. "Mr. Steele," she said softly, but her voice carried. The audience snapped to attention. Marco tilted his head, pretending innocence. "Yes?" She reached toward the broken award, lifting its largest piece with delicate care. "This award represents a year of work," she said, her voice steady despite the weight in her chest. "Late nights. Sacrifice. Children who now have clean water because of it." Marco opened his mouth, likely to interrupt, but Layla raised her hand and continued. The crowd gasped softly. No one had ever stopped him mid-sentence before. "And you broke it," she said. "Not to be funny. Not to make a point. But because you thought you could." She placed the broken piece firmly on the desk between them. "But you didn't break me." The audience held their breath. Something shifted in the air, the crackling tension of a moment transforming into something unforgettable. Marco blinked, his smug expression faltering for the first time. Layla straightened her green hijab, lifted her chin, and looked directly into the nearest camera. "If you think a Muslim girl doesn't belong in science, or on this stage, or in this country," she said calmly, "then you don't understand what strength looks like." A wave of electricity rippled through the room. The audience began to react, slowly at first, then louder, a mix of shock, cheers, and raised voices. Marco's smile dissolved entirely. He had no idea, absolutely none, that she was just getting started. The audience's reaction rolled through the studio like a rising wave. Some people clapped instinctively, others stared in stunned silence, unsure whether they were witnessing a moment of courage or the beginning of a scandal. Marco froze, clearly unprepared for pushback. His face twitched with discomfort, his usual armor of arrogance cracking beneath the pressure of Layla's composure. He opened his mouth to fire back with another joke, but the energy in the room had shifted completely. The cameras, sensing the tension, zoomed in on Layla's face, her steady gaze, her calm breath, the quiet fire glowing behind her eyes. A producer in the control room whispered urgently, "Stay on her. Don't cut. Don't cut." Millions watching at home leaned forward in their seats. She had spoken clearly, fearlessly. And the world was suddenly, unexpectedly, on her side. Marco cleared his throat, trying to regain control. All right, he said with an awkward laugh. "Let's not make this dramatic. It was just a joke." His tone shifted, defensive now. "People need to lighten up. We can't be so sensitive about everything." But his attempt landed flat. No one laughed. Not even the audience members who usually cheered at anything he said. Layla kept her eyes locked on him. "Respect isn't sensitivity," she said. "And tearing down someone else's achievement isn't humor. It's cruelty." Her voice was still calm, still gentle, but its strength was undeniable. Marco's jaw tightened. He looked toward the crew for help, but they avoided his eyes. Even they knew he had crossed the line. The silence around him grew heavier, until it felt like the air itself was rejecting him. This wasn't his moment anymore. It was hers. Then Layla did something entirely unexpected. She walked toward the center of the stage, carrying the broken award piece with her. "If anyone wants to understand what this trophy meant," she said, turning slowly toward the cameras, "they should understand what came before it." The giant screen behind her lit up with images, photos from her project, shots of her filtration prototype. Videos of children filling cups with clean water from a device she had built with less than $40 of materials. The producers hadn't planned this. They scrambled in the control room, but the footage, sent earlier for a brief introduction segment, was now being used by Layla with raw power. The audience gasped as the reality of her work unfolded in vivid color. This wasn't just an award. This was impact. This was change. This was a girl using science to heal her community. Marco stood frozen, visibly shrinking as the studio turned into a shrine of her accomplishments. When the final clip faded, the audience erupted, not with cautious applause, but with a thunderous ovation that shook the walls. People stood from their seats. Some wiped tears. Even the camera operators paused, their lenses lowering for a moment as they clapped quietly behind the scenes. Layla stood in the center, not smiling arrogantly, not basking in attention, just breathing, steady and proud. The girl Marco tried to humiliate had become the heart of the entire show. And the host, the man who thought he could tear her down, had never looked smaller in his life. She didn't know it yet, but outside the studio, social media was already exploding. Her name was beginning to trend worldwide. And this moment, this exact moment, would change everything that came next. The moment Layla stepped off stage, the studio erupted into chaos, producers shouting into headsets, assistants rushing back and forth, the control room drowning in frantic orders. But she heard none of it. Her ears still rang with the echo of applause, and her hands still tingled from the adrenaline that had surged through her. Her mother rushed toward her, eyes wet, arms open. Layla fell into her embrace, the tension of the last hour melting all at once. "You were brilliant," Umi whispered, voice trembling with pride. "You showed them who you are." Before Layla could answer, her phone buzzed violently, so many notifications arriving at once that the screen froze. She frowned, confused. She hadn't even said anything online. What was happening? When the device unfroze, the number was impossible to ignore. 127 unread messages, then 300, then 500. Her breath caught. Something massive was happening beyond the studio walls. Meanwhile, in the hallway outside, staff members huddled around monitors replaying the moment Marco tore the award. "This is bad," one whispered. "Really bad." Another shook his head. "She handled it better than any adult I've seen." Clip after clip circulated internally, but the outside world had already moved faster. The first video of the incident hit social media within 90 seconds of airing. By the time Layla walked from backstage into the green room, it had already surpassed 1 million views. People were outraged, not just hurt or shocked, but furious. Comments flooded timelines. "This is disgusting. How dare he do that? That girl handled herself like a queen." News outlets retweeted the moment. Activists amplified it. Scientists, educators, celebrities, voices from across the world were posting her name. Layla Rahman had become a symbol overnight. Inside the green room, Marco Steele stormed in, red-faced, cameras trailing him as he tried to explain himself. "It was a joke," he barked, waving his hands as if trying to erase the memory. "Everyone needs to lighten up." But the damage was done. Even the staff who had always tolerated his behavior exchanged looks of discomfort. No one wanted to be aligned with him now, not when the world was turning its attention to a 17-year-old girl who had just displayed more dignity than Marco had shown in his entire career. He turned toward Layla, trying to smile, trying to salvage the situation. "Kid," he said, "it's not that serious. I'll get your little trophy replaced." The green room fell silent. Layla looked at him quietly and replied, "It's not the trophy that needs fixing." Marco's smile collapsed. A producer nearby whispered under his breath, "She just ended him." Layla stepped away from the chaos, her phone still vibrating nonstop. She finally opened one notification, just one, and it made her knees weaken. It was a message from a renowned global foundation. "We saw what happened. Please contact us. We'd like to speak with you about funding your project." Another message arrived from a university professor offering mentorship. Then another from a community in Michigan asking if her filtration system could be replicated. She covered her mouth, overwhelmed. The humiliation she had endured seconds earlier was transforming into something powerful, something bigger than she had ever imagined. Overnight, she had become a voice for young Muslim girls, for women in science, for anyone who had ever been dismissed or mocked. And the world was listening. She didn't know yet that this was only the beginning, because her next move would silence more than just a studio. It would shake an entire nation. By the next morning, Layla's name had become impossible to avoid. News anchors replayed the clip of Marco breaking her award, analysts debated the deeper cultural implications, thousands of people stitched her speech into reaction videos. Her phone buzzed so much overnight that the battery drained twice. When she finally sat at the kitchen table with a cup of tea, exhaustion tugging at her eyes, she hoped for a moment of silence, but silence refused to come. Her mother placed a gentle hand on her back. "People saw your strength," she said softly. "Now they want to see what comes next." As if on cue, the doorbell rang. Layla exchanged a confused glance with her mother. It was too early for visitors. When she opened the door, a man in a sleek black jacket stood there, holding an official-looking folder. "Good morning," he said. "Are you Layla Rahman?" Her heart skipped. "Yes." The man smiled. "I'm from the Global Science Alliance. We'd like to speak with you." He stepped inside and placed the folder carefully on the table. "We saw the broadcast," he said. "But more importantly, we'd already seen your work." He opened the folder, revealing documents stamped with the Alliance's emblem. "Our board reviewed your filtration system last month. We were going to reach out in a few weeks, until last night accelerated everything." Layla blinked in disbelief. "You already knew about me?" He nodded. "Your school submitted your project for regional consideration. We were impressed." Her mother pressed a hand to her chest, overwhelmed. The representative continued, "We're offering you a full scholarship to our summer research lab in Geneva, along with a mentorship from one of the leading environmental engineers in the world." Layla stared, speechless. Geneva. A place she had only ever seen in documentaries. Her dream, science at the global level, was suddenly within reach. But the man wasn't finished. He slid a second document across the table. "And there's one more thing," he said. "Our partners at the World Clean Water Initiative watched your interview. One of their directors was moved." He cleared his throat. "She sent this personally." Layla unfolded the letter with trembling hands. The words made her breath hitch. "We would like to fund 10,000 units of your filtration system for communities in need." The room seemed to tilt. 10,000. Her prototype had helped a few families. Now it could help thousands, maybe tens of thousands. Her mother covered her mouth, tears spilling silently. "This can't be real," Layla whispered. But the representative shook his head. "It's very real. And they want you to present your work at the International Youth Summit next month." Layla sat down, her legs weak. Everything she had ever dreamed of, everything she had worked for, everything Marco had mocked, was unfolding faster than she could comprehend. As the representative gathered his documents and prepared to leave, he paused at the door. "One more thing," he said with a small smile. "The world didn't see a girl being humiliated last night. They saw a leader." With that, he stepped outside, leaving Layla and her mother standing in stunned silence. The morning sun filtered through the curtains, casting golden light across the broken award on the counter. Layla walked toward it, picking up the jagged top piece again. Last night it had felt like the end of something. But now, in her hands, it felt like the beginning. She pressed the two pieces together, fitting the broken edges. It didn't form the same shape anymore, but it still held. And so did she. When she finally breathed again, she whispered the truth that had begun to bloom inside her. "This isn't just my fight anymore. This is my purpose." By midday, every major news outlet had played the clip of Marco breaking the award at least a dozen times. Analysts dissected his expression frame by frame, activists highlighted Layla's composure, politicians weighed in with statements condemning his behavior. The world was no longer whispering, it was roaring. But far from the noise, Layla sat quietly at her desk, sketching adjustments to her filtration model. For the first time in days, she felt calm. Purpose had a way of steadying her, giving her a center no humiliation could touch. Her phone lit up again, more notifications, but she ignored them, focused on improving water flow efficiency. Science was her refuge. Her strength. Her language. She was deep in concentration when her mother entered the room, holding the house phone with trembling fingers. "Layla," she said softly, "someone wants to speak with you." Layla frowned. "Who?" Her mother swallowed. "The network." Layla took the phone slowly, her heart tightening. "Hello," she said cautiously. A voice she instantly recognized answered, Director Helen Moore, the highest-ranking executive at the station. "Layla, dear. I want to begin by saying how deeply sorry we are." The woman's tone was steady but laced with embarrassment. "Yesterday's incident was unacceptable. We've launched a full internal investigation, and Marco's conduct will have consequences." Layla said nothing, waiting. "We're reaching out," Helen continued, "not for damage control, but because we want to make this right. We would like to invite you back to the studio for a special segment, one entirely dedicated to your work. You'll have full control. No jokes, no interruptions, no commentary. Just your voice and your mission." Layla's grip tightened. A nationwide platform. Her project. Her story. On her terms. Her first instinct was to refuse. Returning felt like walking back into the scene of a trauma. But another part of her, the part that knew what her project meant to communities who couldn't afford clean water, hesitated. This wasn't about Marco. Or pride. Or vengeance. This was about opportunity. Impact. Amplification. She took a breath. "Why me?" she asked quietly. "Why not just issue an apology?" Helen sighed. "Because people trust you now. They saw your strength. And they want to hear you speak, not us." A long silence stretched. Her mother squeezed her hand, eyes full of encouragement. Finally, Layla asked the question that mattered, "Will Marco be there?" Helen's breath caught. "No," she said firmly. "He has been suspended effective immediately." For the first time since the incident, Layla felt the full weight of what she had ignited, accountability. She closed her eyes, letting the moment settle, letting her heartbeat return to steadiness. "I'll come," she said finally. "But only if the segment focuses on the filtration system and on the children who need it." Helen exhaled in relief. "Of course. Absolutely. Whatever you need, we'll arrange it." When Layla hung up, her mother pulled her into a tight embrace. "You are rewriting the world, Habibti," she whispered. "One truth at a time." Layla looked at the broken award on her desk, the symbol of mockery, now transformed into a symbol of resilience. She touched the fractured edge gently. "Then let's make sure the world hears the right story," she said. Her voice wasn't angry. It wasn't trembling. It carried something far stronger, conviction. Because Layla didn't just survive the storm. She was learning how to bend the lightning. The day of the special segment arrived faster than Layla expected. As she stood once again behind the heavy studio curtain, her palms grew warm, not with fear this time, but with purpose. The studio felt different. No bright posters of Marco Steele plastered on the walls, no booming laughter rehearsals, no producers rushing to prepare comedic skits. The atmosphere was quieter, almost reverent. For the first time, the attention wasn't on the host, the jokes, or the ratings, it was on her. A young Muslim girl who refused to be humiliated. A scientist. A voice. She smoothed her green hijab, adjusting it the way she always did before doing something important. Her mother stood beside her again, just like that first night, but this time her eyes held no fear, only pride. "You're walking into the same place," Ummi whispered, "but not as the same girl." And it was true. Layla had stepped into this building as a victim. She was stepping out as a leader. Through the curtain, she could hear an unfamiliar host speaking, a calm, measured voice chosen specifically for this segment. The network had stripped away everything flashy. No jokes. No dramatic music. Just truth. Today, the new host said warmly, "We welcome a young scientist whose resilience has inspired millions." The audience applauded, not out of excitement, but out of respect. Layla felt the vibration of that applause through the floor, like steady waves pushing her forward. When the stagehand signaled her, she stepped out, her chin high, her heart steady. This time, there was no blinding shock from the lights. She saw faces clearly, men, women, students, teachers, people of all ages leaning forward, eager to hear her words. Every camera in the room turned toward her like sunflowers turning toward the sun. And in that moment, she realized, the stage had never belonged to Marco. It belonged to the one who deserved to stand in its light. The host led her to a table where her filtration device sat neatly displayed, assembled just as she had built it months earlier. Instead of being treated like a prop, it stood like a monument. "Layla," the host said softly, "tell us what this does." And she did. Her voice flowed with passion, explaining the membrane structure, the activated carbon layers, the pressure mechanics that allowed low-income families to purify water without electricity. She talked about the neighborhood children whose health had improved, about the mothers who no longer had to boil tap water all night, about the communities now contacting her after the viral broadcast. The audience listened silently, captivated. The camera zoomed in on her device, not her face. And that was exactly how she wanted it. When she demonstrated the filtration in real time, pouring murky water through the system and showing a glass of clear water beneath, the crowd gasped. Some even stood. It was science, not drama, that stole the show. When she finished, the studio erupted in applause, loud, unified, echoing through the walls. Layla stood still, absorbing it not as flattery, but as validation. The host stepped closer. "Layla, you've inspired millions," she said. "What do you want people to learn from what happened?" Layla took a breath. This was her moment to shape the narrative, not as the girl whose award was broken, but as the young woman who refused to be broken with it. "I want people to know," she said, her voice ringing clear, "that respect is not optional. That science belongs to everyone. And that no one's identity, no hijab, no culture, no faith, ever limits their brilliance." The audience rose to their feet. It wasn't applause this time. It was a standing ovation. Layla felt her heart swell, not with pride, but with gratitude. She had reclaimed the stage. Reclaimed the story. Reclaimed her voice. What she didn't know was that someone important, not from TV, not from the internet, but from the highest levels of global leadership, was watching this moment live. And they were about to make a decision that would change her life forever. The studio's applause was still echoing in Layla's ears as she stepped outside into the crisp afternoon air. She expected interviews, reporters, maybe a few supporters waiting nearby, but she did not expect silence. The crowd outside the building wasn't cheering or shouting questions. They were staring upward. Phones raised. Faces frozen. A low vibration shook the air, growing louder, deeper, heavier. Layla followed their gaze, her breath catching in her throat. A helicopter, matte black and unmistakably official, hovered above the studio roof. Not a news chopper. Not police. Something far more serious. Its side door slid open mid-hover, and a figure stepped into view, gripping the railing as the wind whipped around him. A man in a tailored navy suit, wearing a headset, scanning the crowd with sharp, decisive eyes. When he spotted her, he nodded once. Purposefully. The helicopter began to descend. Security guards rushed forward, urging bystanders to step back. Reporters whispered frantically, trying to identify the insignia on the helicopter's side, until one shouted, "That's the emblem of the Global Science and Humanitarian Council." Gasps spread like lightning. That council advised entire governments. They didn't just send emails. They didn't just make calls. They arrived when someone's work demanded urgent global attention. Layla felt her mother's hand reach for hers, trembling. Habibti, this can't be for you. But deep down, Layla knew it was. The helicopter touched down only long enough for the man in the navy suit to step out. His expression was solemn, not dramatic, not theatrical, simply deeply respectful. He approached Layla with careful, measured steps. Miss Rahman, he said over the roar of the blades, may I speak with you? Crowds leaned in. Cameras zoomed. The world held its breath. My name is Daniel Hayes, he continued. I'm the Director of Field Operations for the Global Council. He removed a sealed envelope from inside his coat. Your demonstration today, and the footage from earlier this week, reached our headquarters. He handed her the envelope with both hands, not casually, but ceremonially. Layla opened it slowly. Inside was a letter printed on thick, embossed paper. Her eyes scanned the first lines, and widened. We hereby extend an official request for your immediate participation in a humanitarian deployment. Her pulse quickened. Daniel continued, there is a region overseas facing a severe water crisis. Your filtration system is uniquely suited for emergency field use. We'd like you to join our rapid response team, in person, to help install units. A full team will accompany you. You will be supervised, protected, and treated as the lead engineer for your invention. The crowd gasped. Her mother covered her mouth. Layla felt her knees weaken. For a moment, she said nothing. The decision was enormous. Unimaginable. But then she thought of the children in her neighborhood, the first one she helped. She thought of every message from families begging for clean water. She thought of the broken award, the humiliation, the strength she discovered beneath it. She lifted her chin. Yes, she whispered. The director nodded with a faint smile. Then gather what you need. Wheels up in 2 hours. He stepped back toward the helicopter, shouting final instructions to his team. Reporters burst into motion, shouting questions that vanished under the thundering blades. As Layla and her mother held each other, overwhelmed, the helicopter ascended again, this time leaving a clear path for her. The world had tried to embarrass her. She was about to save it instead. 2 hours later, the sun dipped low over the city as Layla stood in her small bedroom, packing a backpack that suddenly felt too light for the weight of her next journey. A scarf, her notebook, her filtration prototypes, and a tiny velvet pouch her mother placed in her hand. For protection, Ummi whispered. Inside it was a small silver pendant inscribed with sabr, patience. Layla closed her fingers around it, feeling the cool metal steady her heartbeat. Outside, a convoy of sleek vehicles waited to escort her to the helipad. Neighbors gathered on the sidewalks, some waving, some crying, some just watching in stunned awe as the girl they had always known, but perhaps never truly seen, prepared to leave on a humanitarian mission at 17. Her father stood quietly in the doorway, pride softening his features. You were born for this, he said. Not the applause. The service. The convoy cut through the city as the setting sun painted the windows gold. When they arrived at the secure rooftop, the same black helicopter from earlier stood ready. Its blades turned slowly, like a heartbeat gathering strength. Daniel Hayes approached her with a respectful nod. Layla, he said, before we depart, I want you to understand something. You're not coming because of what happened on television. You're coming because your invention can save lives. She nodded. I know. He steadied her face, young, determined, still a little afraid but standing tall despite it. Are you ready? He asked. Layla looked at the skyline stretching to the horizon, a world larger than she had ever imagined waiting beyond it. I'm ready to help, she said. He smiled. Then let's begin. Minutes later, the helicopter lifted into the sky, rising above the city lights, the crowds, the cameras, the noise. Layla watched the buildings shrink beneath her, the same city that had humiliated her, defended her, lifted her, transformed her. As the helicopter broke through the last layer of clouds, she felt something shift inside her. This wasn't a victory lap. This wasn't revenge. This was purpose. Below her, news drones captured the moment live. Millions watched as the helicopter carrying the teenage scientist disappeared into the sky, a powerful symbol of resilience and hope. Analysts would later call it the moment the world stood still, but inside the cabin, Layla felt only the quiet hum of the engine and the steady beat of her own heart. "How long is the flight?" she asked. 14 hours, Daniel replied. "You should rest." But Layla didn't rest. She opened her notebook and began designing improvements. As dawn approached on the other side of the world, the helicopter descended toward a field camp where rows of tents stretched across dry, cracked earth. Children and families stood waiting, their faces weary but hopeful. Engineers rushed forward to greet the arriving team, but when they saw how young Layla was, they paused, astonished. Daniel stepped aside and gestured toward her. "Meet the lead engineer," he said. Layla stepped off the helicopter, the warm wind sweeping her hijab behind her like a banner. The crowd watched as she knelt beside the first water tank, assembling her filtration system with careful, practiced hands. Minutes later, clear water began to flow. A young girl cupped her hands beneath it, drinking clean water for the first time in weeks. Her eyes widened with joy. "Shukran," she whispered. "Thank you." Layla smiled softly. "Water belongs to everyone," she replied. And as the camp erupted in grateful cheers, as cameras around the world broadcast the sight of a Muslim girl bringing life back to a dying landscape, one truth became undeniable. The man who tore her award had tried to silence her. Instead, she had silenced the world with her brilliance. If you made it this far, subscribe, leave your like, and tell us where you're watching from. Thank you, and see you next time.